Hands if you can hear me. Okay, good.
What do you need that for?
Trying to get it to come on so I can see the time. There it
All
is.
you have to do is just tap it. It doesn't have to do with anything down here.
All right, 7:01. I think we should get proclaiming. And so here is our Tellabration proclamation in the name of storytelling, the National Storytelling Network, Do Tells, Story Swap, and Southcoast Storytellers Guild are proud to sponsor Tellabration, Saturday, November 20. It's hereby proclaimed to be Tellabration, the worldwide event of storytelling at this moment across 6 continents, in 50 states, from Sacramento to Savannah, from Boise to Barcelona, to West Virginia to the West Indies, from Santa Rosa to Costa Mesa. 300 audiences are gathered for this spectacular storytelling event. Without further delay, enjoy and anticipation. Let the stories begin. And let us begin with the Do Tell Story Swap. Sharon Elwell, will you kindly introduce them to us?
Yes, I'd love to do that. And I'm supposed to tell you all the rules and etiquette that are involved in being the audience tonight. And I want you to know there's a long list of rules, so get ready to take notes. No, I'm just joking. But there are a couple of things, and one of them is there are a couple of people who come to the Do Tell Story group in Santa Rosa, which is, as you know, the geographical center of the known universe. And those that are there sometimes never tell, or sometimes very seldom tell. And we love to see them. And the reason that we do is because they're such a good audience. And when a teller is watching those faces, those little tiny boxes of faces on the Zoom screen, we love to see those that are reacting and laughing in the right places or looking scared in the right places. And so don't feel like you don't have a job, because even if you're not telling tonight, you're going to be a big support to those who are. Our first teller grew up on the coast of England, and I think the story she may tell tonight has to do with a character she invented in her long years of telling stories. And we love this character. So if we're lucky, our Katie Mangan is going to tell us something of her British friend, Shirley Ann. So we'll turn the time to Katie now. Katie, you're still muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Am I on? I can't even see myself. Can you?
Yes, big screen, you are.
Okay, I apologize. No. Well, hello there. I'm Shirley Ann. Oh, I come from England, from a tiny village. It's so tiny, it's hardly worth putting it on the map. A few years ago, I discovered I could talk to trees. Oh, I know you in California, you talk to everything, trees and clouds and rocks, but at the time, I thought I was rather special. So my husband, Len, he came back from work one day. He asked me if I'd spoken to anything. I said, the neighbours. I mean, the village is so tiny, you just go out the front door, there's someone there to say hello to you. He looked at me, he said, any trees? Oh, I had to laugh. I said, no trees. I poured him his cup of tea and he sat at the kitchen table looking at his phone. That's when I remembered. The kitchen had talked to me. I said, Len, the kitchen talked to me. Nice, he said. He was busy on his phone. He didn't hear me, did he? I didn't care. I carried right on. I said, the kitchen wants to be repainted. Lovely, he said. Oh, he wasn't listening, you know. I mean, where do men go? They're right in front of you, but they're not there, are they? But I carried right on. I said, the kitchen wants to be repainted. Apple blossom pink. it was my favorite color at the time. Turns out, sorry, it was my favorite color at the time. Well, Len almost dropped his phone in his tea. He looked at me and said, "There'll be no pink in this kitchen," as if he was lord and master of it. The next day I went to town. I went into one of those big do-it-yourself stores. You know, you have them here, your Home Depot and Lowe's. Quite by chance, don't know how it happened, I found myself in the paint department. Oh, I couldn't resist to look at all those colours. Well, you know, when you're in those big stores, when you need some help, can you find someone? No. But when you don't need any help, well, there's someone right by your side. Nice young man. He said his name was James. He asked me what room I was painting. Oh, I said the kitchen. "Madam, have you picked out a colour?" Ugh. Then I had to tell him the sad story. He asked me if I'd thought of green. "Green," I said. "Green," he said. He picked out a green for the walls, a green for the table, a green for the chairs, and a beautiful creamy white to pull it all together. Ooh, I thought it would be lovely. I told him to mix it up and I took the paint home. I showed it to Len and he was enthusiastic too. So first thing the next day, I began to do the prep work. Oh, it's very boring, but you have to do it, don't you? Well, I was about a third of the way through. I got a rather unpleasant surprise. The floor began to talk to me. It said it wanted to be upgraded. It didn't like the ratty old carpet. And underneath, apparently, there was some nice hardwood floors. And then the kitchen got into it and said, where was the apple blossom pink that it wanted? I said to Len, "Len, you know, it's a shame about the flooring." He looked at me with surprise and a little suspicion. He said, "What about the flooring?" "Oh, Len," I said, "for starters, there's the ratty old carpet." Well, he put his hand up, you know, to stop me talking like he was God. He said, oh, well, he didn't speak, first of all. I could see all those words, you know, going around in his brain. You can see that sometimes, can't you? Then he finally strung all those words together in a sentence. He said, "Love, it's a shame about the paint, but we can't afford it. All the money has been spent on the paint." I knew that was a big fat lie. But I had a plan. You see, he had to go away on business. He had to be away for a week, Monday to Friday. I couldn't wait for that Monday morning to roll around. I stood at the kitchen window and I waved him goodbye. I watched the cars that went out the driveway, round the corner. It was gone. I turned my back on the kitchen window. I began to pull up that ratty old carpet. 10 minutes hadn't gone by when there was someone at the back door. Oh, it turned out to be my next door neighbour, Pam. She asked me what I was doing. I told her I was pulling up the ratty old carpet. Oh, let me help, Shirley Ann. I've never liked it. So together we pulled up the carpet. Oh, it took us much longer than we'd thought. Underneath there was a hardwood floor, but it wasn't pretty. Oh, Shirley Ann, you'll have to sand that, she said. She knows these things. Her husband Al is in the flooring trade. I said to myself, Shirley Ann, you've dug yourself into a deep hole this time. You'll have to go rent a sander, figure out how it works. Then I had a terrible thought. What if I plugged it in and it ran away with me? Out the kitchen, down the passageway, out the front door. It could happen. There's only one thing to do at a time like this. It's to put the kettle on and make a proper pot of British tea. It takes a little while, and as it was brewing, Pam was busy on her phone. When I poured her a cup of tea, she smiled and said, well, that's that then. Ooh, I said, what's what? Well, she had texted her husband, Al, and he said he'd bring a sander home. He would sand my floors. Wasn't that nice? So kind. Oh, I said, dinner's on me, wherever you want to go. He arrived home early. And as he was sanding the floors, I contacted my friend James. You remember James in the paint department? I told him I wanted some stain. He told me to come in the next day after 2 o'clock. At 2:02, I walked into the paint department. There was James standing behind the counter with 2 big pots of stain. I didn't look at the little sample, you know, on the top. I looked straight into his eyes. I said, James, what colour is that stain? And he looked back at me. He said, Charlie Ann, it is apple blossom red. I looked down. Oh, it was a beautiful colour, but it had a lot of pink in it. But I didn't care. I took the stain home and I followed his directions to the letter. It looked magnificent. But Friday was fast approaching. Len would be home. I didn't want him to walk into the kitchen, get the surprise of his life. What if he had a heart attack or something? I would never forgive myself. So, knowing he didn't have a house key, I locked the front door and the back door. He came to the front door. Oh, I said, Len, welcome home. We'll have a nice surprise for you in the kitchen. Come on. So together we walked down the passageway. I rather dramatically flung open the kitchen door. Well, the first thing he saw was the floor, wasn't it? I held my breath. I crossed my fingers. I would have crossed my toes. He looked at me. He said, Charlie Ann, what colour is that stain? Oh, said Lynn, it is apple blossom red. He looked back at it. And then he began to smile. It looks lovely. The whole kitchen looks perfect. I was quite surprised, as I knew he didn't like, you know, the pink, the colour pink. And that's when he said something that really shocked me. He looked at the colour of the floor again and he said, you know, love, that colour doesn't have a hint of pink in it. I looked at him as if he was stark raving mad. That's when I suddenly realized the man is totally colorblind. Blessings, abundance, and healing to you all.
Oh, Katie, we're so glad to share Shirley Ann with the Southcoast folks and the rest of the world, and hope there'll be more stories about her coming up. Our next teller was a familiar face around the Bay Area storytelling scene until she decided to move to civilization and came up to Sebastopol, where we were lucky enough to get her into the Do Tell group. The kind of stories she tells are, she says they have a little bit of magic, but usually they have a lot of magic. So please welcome to the stage our dear Vicki Ness. Vicki, don't forget to unmute.
Okay. I am going to put it on gallery because I'm looking at you, Sharon. So there we are. Edith lived in a beautiful neighborhood. I mean, it was spectacular. All the lawns were perfectly manicured. Every house was perfect. And inside each house, the people believed that they had a very firm grip on the good life. Their kids were probably smarter than anybody else's kids. Their car probably sleeker than anybody else's. They probably made more money. And certainly their dinner parties were more scintillating. And oh yes, their Christmas ornaments were way more charming than anybody else. The good life. Well, Edith, for one, was sick of it. So one day she went into the garage and she got herself a ladder and boom, up against the wall it went. And she climbed up till she was at the apex of the roof. 1 foot on one side, 1 foot on the other side. with a bottle of squishy glue and a pillow that she had cut open. So she took the icky sticky glue and went all over herself, everywhere. Glue, glue, sticky, icky glue. Then she took the pillow and she shook it over her head so that white chicken feathers flew in the November wind like a blizzard. Oh, they just covered her till she was all chicken feathers. And that's when she looked directly into the wind and she said, I want more than this. I want to fly. And she raised her wings and she flap, 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 flap. Flap, 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 flap. She was flying. Oh my goodness, she's flying. Oh, Edith is flying. And off she took across the lawn, smack into a maple tree at the end of the driveway. The tree shook, leaves fell down, feathers fell down, and eventually so did Edith. Boom. The neighbors thought this was pretty funny. Did you see Edith? Chicken feathers. My goodness. I'm so glad that's her and not me. What a fool she is. Then they went back to their Peloton machinery to buff up, and they went back to their Ina Garten recipes to make sure that their dinner party was even better than last time. And everybody went back to normal. Well, a couple days later, there goes Edith up the ladder again to the apex of the roof. Squishy bottle of glue in the bag. Icky sticky glue all over herself. Glue. She took the bag. She shook it over her head. And enormous turkey feathers sailed out in umber and sienna and deep, rich tobacco browns, falling like fall leaves, this way, that, turning in the wind until they covered her. Edith the turkey looked right into the wind and she said, I want more than this. I want to fly. And she raised her wings and she flap, 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 and she did fly. There she goes. There she goes. Edith is flying. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And she flew right into the next county. But the problem was it hadn't occurred to her where exactly she was going. So consequently, she got tired and she wound up face down in the middle of a cornfield. Well, fortunately, she brought her little cell phone and she called an Uber and got a ride home. But when she got out of the Uber, the neighbors were watching, and this time they didn't hide their laughter. And there was Edith covered in corn silk and leaves and turkey feathers. Hey, if I need a scarecrow next fall, I know who to call. And everybody went back to their houses, including Edith. A couple days later, there she was at the roof once again with her icky, sticky glue and a bag. And she glue all over herself. Glue. Then she got the bag and she shook it over her head. And long, black, glossy, iridescent feathers fell, swirling like lacquered gondola boats in a maelstrom sea. The wind picked up and let them fall all over her. But this time, instead of facing down the wind, she turned her back to it and let the wind caress her back. And this time, instead of saying what she wanted, she looked around with appreciation and she just said, thank you, thank you. And she raised her wings and instead of flapping as hard as she could, she just lifted them up and the wind came and picked her up And she sailed so gracefully. She soared this way and that, a little correcting to spin like an Olympic skater and rise again. Wow, she said, I can see every horizon. The joy and the freedom was wonderful until she finally settled down on the top of the tallest tree in the neighborhood. And she looked down at the neighbors. They, for their part, were looking up at her, but they were really, really mad. What is that ugly thing up there? Our neighborhood doesn't have to have an ugly thing, does it? Let's get rid of that ugly thing. And other people said, it's going to eat our little Chihuahua mixed dogs. It's going to chase our children. It's going to poop all over the place. It's a terrible big bird. It has to go. So somebody called animal control, who came out, very nice young man in his green outfit. And he stood among them and he looked up. Wow, he said, that's a California condor. Oh, they're magnificent. I've never seen one this close. You people are so lucky. It's beautiful. No, it isn't, they said. No, it isn't. It needs to go. You need to get rid of it. And he said, no. For one thing, they're protected. They're endangered. And for another thing, they're beautiful. What? It's going to eat my doggie. It's going to chase my children. No, he said, no. Actually, they only get rid of the dead, okay? If you're alive, you have nothing to worry about, okay? You're alive? Yes, you have nothing to worry about. If you're dead, not so much. You got a problem. And with that, he rolled his eyes, went back to his van, drove off. Edith, for her part, was up in the top of the tree, looking down, preening her feathers. Oh, and she settled back down. And she looked down at everybody that she dearly loved. But the longer she looked, the more intense her look got. And the more intense her look got, the more serious she became. And the people under the tree looking up, instead of being angry now, became very frightened. Because it occurred to them that just maybe Edith the condor could actually tell who was living a good life and who had a death grip on their acquisitions and their social status and their death grip on the good life, to the point that they weren't, actually living much at all. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Vicki. That's wonderful. Let's turn the time over now to the Southcoast group. David, are you there?
I am so there, it hurts. How are you all? I want to thank you for the very interesting, very animated stories so far. I would like to first bring to your attention a longtime member of the Southcoast Storytellers Guild. He's told at museums, libraries, schools, at the Orangewood Children's Home in or City of Orange. He misses them dearly, hopes to be back telling with the kids as soon as this COVID nastiness is blown over. I also have it on very good authority that he is the world's handsomest storyteller. He is me, David Whiting, going to present to you the story, a harrowing adventure, Escape from New Hampshire. My good friend Misty lived not too many blocks away from me. Like all my best friends, she is a lover of furry, friendly animals. In her case, she had a little hamster who she named Harry for very obvious reasons. Such a luxurious mane of fur. She spent all her allowance money keeping him comfortable, giving him the purest crystal waters to drink from, the most up-to-date exercise wheel. I don't think it was a Pelotron, but it did help him keep his hamsterly muscles in fighting trim, the best food to eat. And so she thought her life was complete. Harry thought his life was complete. And her father came up the stairs one day and said, Misty, I bet your life was not complete. I have good news. I've fallen in love again. Misty's mom had been gone a long time, but her dad was announcing there was going to be a stepmom. She was flying all the way from New York City to come be with them the very next month. You know, there's going to be a little more going on in the house. Yes, I know, it's stepmom. No, with your stepbrother. She has a child of her own named Mikey. He's just about your age, full of high spirits. I'm sure you'll like him. And guess what? Mikey keeps a hamster too. There was going to be a step hamster. And the next month, there he came. Mikey carried him upstairs, put him in a cage with Harry. This step hamster's name was Rocco. He lived in New York City all his life in a window overlooking Central Park. And Rocco walked up, a very solidly built little creature, up to Harry and said, "This is a nice place you got here, Harry. Are those crystal pure waters?" And Rocco went over to that bottle hanging low and slurped down every single drop so that Harry had nothing left whatsoever. Said Rocco, "That makes me all thirsty. That makes me all full. I'm going to eat some food." And he ate all of Harry's food with big yellowy incisors. And then Rocco went to the exercise wheel. Now, Harry had built up his hamsterly muscles on that wheel and gotten it to go really, really fast, but he had never seen any hamster run a wheel like Rocco. Rocco ran with such fury, with such speed, that pretty soon all you could see was a blurry circle going around and around and around. And from the midst of that blur, a voice said, "Hey, Harry, I'm going to show you a little trick." And Rocco let go of the wheel, and the motion of the wheel flung Rocco across the cage, right into Harry, smacked him right into the walls of his cage. Harry got up dazed and hurt, and Rocco did not look sorry at all. Rocco said, "Do you like that trick, Harry? I like to practice it a lot." Not the best roommate at all. Well, Harry, when he could get a mouthful to eat, he would go to sleep and he would even dream of this terrible new creature in his life. He would dream of Rocco flying off the wheel, soaring across the cage, smacking him into the wall. And it was a relief to wake up and realize that it was just a dream, until he realized to his horror that Rocco really was flying at him as he slept. He just opened his eyes and had barely enough time to see Rocco's big yellow incisors come closer and smack Harry off balance. Harry had no time to brace himself, so he was not smacked against the wall of his cage. He was pushed hard against the door, hard against the latch, which popped loose from the little ring that held it in place. And so for the first time in his life, Harry tumbled out of the cage onto the floor of the bedroom where he slept, unsupervised. He'd been outside the cage, of course, but always in his big plastic exercise ball, where he could roam around and make it roll and see the world. But this was so much more interesting. Now he could smell. Now he could feel everything through his whiskers. Now he could go places the ball had been too big to carry him. He went underneath the dresser, found an old sock, most interesting to sniff at, came underneath the bed, came under toward the hall, and that's when he bumped into a great big shoe. And he saw that shoe was attached to a great big leg, which was attached to none other than Misty. "Harry, how did you get out?" she said. "Oh, you poor thing," picking him up. "I could have stepped on you. You could have been squished. Oh, you can't be out like this. Let me put you back in the cage right now." And Harry looked up at his friend and said, "No, don't put me back in the cage. But what came out of his mouth was actually more like, and Misty did not know how to speak hamster. Her education was not yet complete. And so she was carrying poor Harry back across the bedroom to his doom, when all of a sudden, from the stairs, from the room below, a voice said, "Misty, this somebody, and I know it was you, put a peanut butter sandwich in the VCR, and it's ruined. You get down here and explain yourself, young lady." She had only been with her stepmom for a few weeks, but she already knew that particular voice. It was a hard voice to forget when she was upset. She also knew that she needed to go down right away or things would get worse. So instead, she did not carry Harry the rest of the way across her big bedroom. She put him in the nearest safe place she could find. I'll come back and get you. And she put him in his exercise ball, his clear plastic exercise ball. And down the steps, looking very worried, went Misty. Well, Harry was not comfortable at all. He was worried about his friend. He was worried about the trouble she would get in. He was a loyal pet. And so he began to run and run and run, and that ball began to roll, and it rolled out of the bedroom door, and it rolled down the second-story hall, and it began to roll toward the top of the stairs. That's when Harry began to run backward a little bit to make the ball stop, so he would not tumble and smash himself all the way down those stairs. It looked like a very, very treacherous descent. And down at the bottom of the house, there was Misty. There was stepmother gesticulating and exhorting. And there was the entertainment center. And there was the VCR. I should explain for you youngsters, a VCR was a video machine used long, long ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and I was a young person. And there was peanut butter, chunk style, oozing out of the VCR. But what stepmother did not see, because she was facing away from it, on the far side of the entertainment center, on the white painted wall, there was a smear of pink, very out of place on the white wall. And Harry, thinking hard, looking at it, realized that that was bubblegum pink. Whoever had put that peanut butter in the VCR had also smeared that bubblegum on the wall. Couldn't believe it was Misty, who was normally such a neat child. And that's when he remembered something else. His brain was working on all cylinders that day. Misty had just gotten her braces put in. And while she used to be very fond of bubblegum and chewing and blowing the most enormous bubbles, something with her braces were keeping her from doing it properly, to the point where she didn't enjoy chewing her gum anymore. And so Harry knew, and he cried out, "Stepmom, don't punish Misty. Whoever put the peanut butter in the VCR also put the gum on the wall. The two messes are right next to each other, and she doesn't use bubble gum anymore since her braces mean she can't blow those huge bubbles." But what came out was, and you would think that stepmother would be fully educated and know what he was saying, but she did not speak hamster either. Harry knew that he had to find some way to save Misty from a punishment worse than death. And his brain's still working quickly. He looked this way and he looked that way, and he looked down the hall and saw Mikey's bedroom door half open. And he saw Mikey's school bag sitting out into the hall. He really was a very messy little boy, although nice in many other ways. And because he was a messy little boy, he had also not closed his backpack top last night when he'd come home from school. It was half open. The zipper hole was just about wide enough to fit a hamster's exercise ball inside. Harry's idea was to run very fast toward that school bag, run so fast that the ball would begin to gain momentum across the carpet. It would begin to run. He ran as fast as he ever had. He ran faster by imagining he was running away from Rocco. That was a big help. Faster and faster it rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled and whoop, right into the half open zipper on top of the school bag. Stuck there neat as you please, neither in nor out. And so when Mikey clambered out of his room, late for school as usual, put the backpack on his back, tromping down the stairs, he did not even notice he had a small fuzzy passenger on the back of his backpack in the half open zipper. He was in too big a hurry. "Bye, Ma," he said, rushing past the living room out toward the front door. And Harry knew he'd gotten downstairs. He hadn't jangled his bones all up, but now he had to get out of his backpack, or he was going to be carried under the school bus and end up as a show and tell exhibit. And so Harry, using hamsterly muscles that he'd been building up on his exercise wheel, pushed and jumped and pushed and jumped and pushed. And that last push must have been the strongest motion he'd made in his life, and it was just enough to jar the exercise ball a little bit loose, so that as Mikey pitched forward out the front door, he was able to pitch the ball backward over the open edge of the backpack and boom, boom, onto the hall floor, the foyer floor. And so Harry, his work was not done. He began to run that ball and make that ball roll out of the foyer into the front room, past Misty, who was standing there, so busy being in trouble that she did not notice her little pet for a moment, just past stepmother, who looked down to say, "Oh, and look, your pet pets are out of control too. Such a disorderly girl. And past the entertainment center and tore that sticky pink spot of gum on the wall until, boom, with its momentum, that exercise ball stuck against the bubble gum. Now, stepmother was using Harry to make a complaint about. She was paying a good deal more attention to him, and she knew for a fact his exercise ball was not supposed to be sticking to a wall like that. And so she pulled it off, looked at the pink bubble gum, peered over at Misty's mouth. Misty gave her a nervous smile. Mouth full of braces, not a speck of bubble gum. And stepmother realized there was only one gum chewer in this house and called out the front door, "Marky!" Well, the truth came out. And Misty was spared a punishment worse than death. And she was given a second dessert that night by way of apology. But she knew who her savior was, and she decided to do her best to pay Harry back. She had some allowance money saved up. She got some more money car washing that evening, and she got together all of her money, and she bought Harry a brand new cage with cushions and a custom-made hamster bed and her own exercise wheel. And best of all, she put it on a shelf all the way across the bedroom from where Rocco sat in Harry's old cage. I visited Misty's house the other day. I had the chance to go up and take a little peek and see Harry happily in that sunlit shelf, looking across to Rocco, saying, but I don't speak hamster, so I don't think I'll ever know what he said exactly. But that is the story, as best I know it, of how Harry made an escape from New Hampshire. A short story by me. For all furry animal lovers every place. I like furry animals very, 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 very much, but there are certain special human beings, storytellers, story listeners, and clever women that I have a great deal of respect for. My friend and fellow storyteller, Doris Hand, has told at the Juvenile Hall in Orange County, has told at scouting events, has made the festival at many of the library museum shows that I've been privileged to tell at. Been my good friend for a long time, and my predecessor is president of the Southcoast Storytellers Guild, and she will now share the story, Clever Carmelita. Doris, I can't wait.
Thank you, David. Basically, in this age of technology, I'm going to time travel us back to the era of Spanish governors in Chile. And they say there was this particular young governor named Don Pedro. And Don Pedro was a bachelor, he was handsome, and he had a clever wit. Now, all his advisors told him, "Senor Governor, you need to take a wife." And they offered many suggestions. And he said, "I'll have none of that. My wife has to be as clever as I am." And so each day he would ride out in different directions from the town looking for a wife. And when he'd find a young woman, he would stop and greet her. And then in rhyme, he'd ask her a question. When the woman recognized him as governor, she became tongue-tied and would run into the house. Well, on this particular day, he was riding south of town along a stream, and suddenly he came to a very rich hacienda. It happened to have a garden in front, and would you know, there was a young woman working in the garden. And so, of course, Don Pedro stopped. "Buenos dias, señorita. It's plain to see you care for your garden so tenderly, but can you tell me how many leaves are on that tree?" Well, to his surprise, she didn't run in the house. She just turned and looked up at him and said, "Oh, you who question me, first tell me, how many fish in the sea?" Well, now it was Don Pedro's turn to be dumbstruck. He didn't have a reply. And so he rode off, mulling this over. And he thought, she's not going to get the best of me. So he went back to town and made inquiries and discovered that her name was Carmelita. And everyone warned him, watch out for her clever wit. Well, this intrigued him, so he went back to the palace. He summoned his cook, who was renowned through the area for the best hotcakes and best cakes. And the cook was old and a bit ugly and almost blind. And he instructed the cook, tomorrow, you are to make your hotcakes. You are to go south of town along the stream till you come to this rich looking hacienda. And you're to find the young woman named Carmelita. You're to sell the hotcakes to her, but not for money. You're going to sell it, each hotcake, for one kiss. Well, the next morning, the cook took his hotcakes and started out very early down the south of town along the stream, calling out, hotcakes for sale, hotcakes for sale. He did come to this rich looking house, hacienda, and there was a stream, but he didn't see the young woman working in the garden. He went a bit further and there she was washing clothes along the stream. Hotcakes for sale, hotcakes for sale. The aroma of his hotcakes floated through the air, and Carmelita turned because she caught the aroma, and she looked at him and she said, grandfather, how much are your hotcakes? Ah, señorita, very cheap, very cheap. You don't even have to pay money. One hotcake for one kiss. Well, Carmelita said, oh, grandfather, you're old enough even to be my great-grandfather. I don't want to kiss you. Oh, but señorita, I'm almost blind and who's around? Nobody's going to see us. Well, the aroma got to Carmelita. She could not refuse. And so she gave him all about 12 kisses and got her dozen hotcakes. And they enjoyed them that morning. Well, you know, of course, the governor was going to ride out that afternoon. And so he did. And he saw Carmelita was working in the garden again. And he started his little game. How many leaves on the tree? Oh, how many fish in the sea? Then it was his turn. He said, ho, ho, Carmelita down by the brook. How many kisses did you give my cook? Oh, Carmelita turned beet red. She threw down her tool and she ran into the house and slammed the door. That man was not going to get the best of her. Well, she waited and thought and waited. She didn't have to wait long, for you see, the flu ran through the whole area. And of course, the governor caught the flu and thought he was going to die. And word went out, the governor thinks he's going to die. And this gave Carmelita an idea. Her father would always like to throw large parties, costume parties. And so she went to her father's closet and she looked through the clothes because she knew everyone in the area had this deep devotion to Saint Anthony. Saint Anthony could cure anything. So she was looking for a long gray robe and a gray wig, and she found them. And so she put the robe on and the wig on, and then she went back into the barn and she got the family pig and tied a rope around him. And later that morning, she started out toward town, leading the pig. When she arrived in the town, of course, the people recognized her as St. Anthony. St. Anthony's come. And word spread, and she made her way to the palace. And when the servants outside saw her, they said, oh, St. Anthony, you came. And she said, yes, my son, I came because God sent me to help the governor. And so they led her into the governor's bedroom. And when she entered leading the pig, she said, oh, God has sent me, Senior Governor. He has heard your prayers and he sent me to help you. And the governor moaned, I don't want to die. Oh, my son, I will pray for you. Just look at this lowly pig, one of God's lowliest creatures. And if you could just humble yourself to give this pig a kiss, I will pray that you get 1 more year of life for every kiss you give it. Well, the governor didn't want to die. He wanted a long life. And so he hopped out of bed, he knelt down, and he gave that pig 100 kisses on its bristly snout. And Carmelita, as St. Anthony said, "Ah, my son, you will have a long life. I will say a prayer for every kiss you gave my pig." And then she turned and led the pig out and back through the town, back to the hacienda, and she got rid of her robe, wig, and the pig back in the barn. And then that, of course, the governor basically recovered, which everyone knew he would. And as soon as he recovered, he rode out again to Carmelita's hacienda. And she was working in the garden, and he started the game. How many leaves on the tree? How many fish in the sea? Ho, ho, Carmelita down by the brook. How many kisses did you give my cook? And then it was Carmelita's turn. Ah, Senor Governor, a saint can easily be made with robe and wig. Tell me, how many kisses did you give my pig? Well, the governor had no answer. He just sat on his horse and laughed and laughed till his sides ached. And then he rode back to the palace in town. And he knew he found the woman he wanted to marry. And so he had his advisors speak with her father to make an arrangement for the marriage contract. When the day came to agree on the contract, of course, Carmelita was there. And she said, "I will agree on one condition. The governor has to promise me in writing that he will grant the last wish I have before I die." Of course, the governor wanted to do this. And so he gave her the written promise. And the wedding was held. And you'd say, well, they lived happily ever after. But there's another chapter. You see, as rulers go, many times they make a bad decision. And the governor was no exception. He made bad decisions regarding the people, and Carmelita would go and plead their case and get it changed. And he would get all upset, but he always forgave her until the incident of the little kitten. A neighbor's cat had a kitten, and it wandered into the palace, and the governor took a terrible liking to it. He asked the neighbor to sell it. The neighbor wouldn't sell it. Then he said, "Well, it's mine. I'm governor." And he knew that wasn't a good way to go. So he said, "We will have a contest, a test. You bring your cat and I'll bring mine, and we'll put them on opposite sides of the palace hall and the kitten in the center, and we will see to which cat the kitten goes." So the day came of the test. And the neighbor brought her cat and the kitten. The governor brought his cat and put it on one side, and the neighbor put her cat on the other side. And the kitten was put in the center. And then everybody watched, and the kitten went over to the governor's cat. Well, everybody was astounded. Then the governor said, "See, I told you this kitten did belong to me." Well, Carmelita walked over to the woman and whispered in her ear and said, "You have to know that the governor put catnip on his cat, and it's not a tabby, it's a tomcat." And so the neighbor looked up at the governor and said, "Oh, Senor Governor, everyone knows that only a tabby can give milk to a kitten, not a tom, and your cat is a tomcat." Well, everybody kind of started laughing, and the governor got angry and red, and he said, "Carmelita, you've done it now. You're going to die." Everybody was upset, but Carmelita was very calm. And she said, "All right, if that's what you wish, but remember, you promised me one last wish before I die. Please bring me writing materials." And they were brought, and she wrote her wish, and she had it given to the governor. And so he opened it and he read it, and he said, "Carmelita wishes that I die with her when she dies." And of course he didn't want to die. And so he pardoned her. And from that time on, governor knew he had to always consult Carmelita before he made a decision. And that's a folktale from Chile, Clever Carmelita. Thank you.
All right, now I understand we are traveling joyfully back to the Do Tell Story Swap. And Sharon Elwell, will you introduce our next teller?
I would, but I think it's time for a break, is it not? We're not scheduled to start the next story until 8 o'clock. So I think we have time for a 10-minute stretch break.
Well, if everybody wants that, does everybody want to take a break? Yeah, okay.
Okay, well, we'll be back here at, let's try for 8 o'clock exactly.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Asia, mostly Indonesia. And now he teaches high school. He's won all kinds of story slams, and we're always excited to bring him to the stage. So please welcome Brandon Spars.
Thank you. All right, I'll just begin. Are you, yeah, there we go. This is a story about why I hate ham. I know it isn't true when I say that my mother served it every night for dinner. It just seemed like she did. I think that's because every time she bought one of those canned hams from the supermarket, we would end up eating it all week long. First, there was the ham itself, blushing scarlet beneath these blackened pineapple rings that looked just like desiccated sea creatures clutching onto some rock in an empty tide pool. And that would be followed by scalloped potatoes, and then deviled ham salad the next day. And the parade of ham would always end with bean soup and ham. And of course, there'd be ham sandwiches for lunch every day in between. Why can't we have tacos? Why can't we have spaghetti? My brother and I would ask. And we did. But of course, we never had a week of tacos or a week of spaghetti. And so when my father would step out onto the porch and call us in for dinner, Brandon, Jonathan, precisely 6:25, more often than not, we were running up and finding a ham dinner waiting for us. And so the years flew by, the hams flew by, and replacing my brother as my companion, I made a friend in middle school. His name was David. He had older siblings, and so David was able to teach me things my little brother couldn't, like how to throw a baseball, how to catch a football, how to kick a soccer ball. Precisely 6:25, my father stepped out onto the porch. Brandon, David, supper time. And we raced up to the kitchen to find my mother in the doorway, who had to interrogate us. You two haven't been smoking down there, have you? David would blink with surprise and innocence and say, why no, Mrs. Spars, we learned in school smoking's bad for you. Well, there was no need to ask what was for dinner. You could tell by the way my brother was slumped in a miserable heap next to my father's open newspaper behind which he was tucked. And of course, there on the table, spitting and hissing like a trapped animal beneath a web of blackened pineapples, was the ham. But it was David who sprang the trap. I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Spars, I can't eat ham. I'm Jewish. My father tore aside his newsprint curtain. He stared at my mother. She looked back at him. My brother peeked through a small gap in his arms to see what would happen. My mother said, well, I guess I could make you a TV dinner. My brother bolted up and announced, I want one too. "Hear, hear," my father said, trying to restore order. And with a backhanded, deliberate motion, he scraped every pineapple off that ham onto a plate and set it right in front of David. "There you go, David. Pineapple." "Thank you, Mr. Spars," David said. "This looks delicious." And so the years went by. "Brandon, David, supper time." We had ham, and David had pineapple for dinner. Well, David gave way to a new companion in high school. 9th grade, this one was a girl. She was everything my parents did not want in a girlfriend for me. She wore exotic eye makeup all the way back to her ears. She wore black lipstick, but you couldn't see any of that because she wore a dark hood. She was what you would call a death rocker, listening to bands like Lords of the New Church and Christian Death. She looked like a little monk of death. I used to sit in the meadow and just watch her for hours as she smoked long black cigarettes, the smoke jetting from her hood, just like toxic fumes from a large diesel exhaust pipe. "Brandon, Dana, supper time." Well, we made our way up to the kitchen door where my mother met us. And of course, the interrogation, "Have you two been smoking down there?" Now, the thing about my girlfriend at the time, in spite of the fact that she was just 5'2", she had one of the deepest voices of anybody I've ever met to this very day. So that when she spoke, a deep rumbling would come from her hood. "Why, yes, Mrs. Spars. As a matter of fact, I have been smoking. Don't worry. My parents know I smoke and I have their full permission." "You better not be smoking," my mother said, jabbing me in the chest. No need to ask what was for dinner. My brother buried beneath his arms in despair. And of course, my mother brought it out and set it down on the table with a crash, making my father start in surprise. The ham. It ticked and sizzled in the hot pan like some kind of mysterious timer. But it was my girlfriend who dropped the bomb. "I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Spars. I cannot eat this ham. I am a vegetarian." My father tore aside his newsprint curtain and looked right at my mother. My brother peeked from under his arms to see what this would unfold. But my father still had that trick up his sleeve. In that deliberate backhanded motion, he scraped every pineapple off that ham onto a plate, set it in front of her, and spoke into the hood as though he were speaking through a drain pipe at someone. "Here you go, Dana. Fruit salad." We all looked at my girlfriend, but she didn't eat. "Don't you like pineapple?" my mother asked. There was a demonic growl from the back of the hood. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Spars. I don't like pineapple when it's been soaked in pig fat. If you don't mind, I'll step out onto your porch and have a cigarette." Well, my mother went into spasms as she tried to regain authority in the situation. "You will do no such thing, young lady. You will sit at this table and make polite conversation. And please remove your hood. It's rude." I remember when she pulled back her hood. For a moment, all of us marveled at her exquisite beauty, her features accented by her bold makeup. She was both stunning and threatening, her beauty indicative of the power she could wield over me, my mother's son. Nobody moved. Nobody was eating. And maybe louder than my mother meant to, she brought her hand down and asked, "Why isn't anybody eating?" My brother remained stacked next to his plate like some kind of cairn dedicated to his forlorn helplessness. My father stared mournfully down at his newspaper on the floor, and me, I was simply dazzled with my girlfriend's beauty and just stared at her. "You like ham," my mother said. "Jonathan," that's my brother, he just moaned. "Brandon," of course, I was just smiling uselessly. Then she focused on my father. "Byron, you like ham?" "Sure," he said, but it wasn't convincing. And maybe for the first time, my mother noticed the meager slivers of ham he had been serving himself for years and years. My brother, he mumbled as if he were having some kind of bad dream. "I hate ham." My girlfriend, who had retreated back beneath her hood, was now bouncing in silent laughter at how dysfunctional our family was. "Fine," my mother said. She stood up and headed to the door. But before she left, she turned and said, "Just throw the ham away." And then she was gone. Nobody moved for an instant. But now it was my brother's turn to spring into action. He leapt out of his chair and gripped the ham in both hands and went out onto the porch where my father had summoned us all to dinner. Brandon, Jonathan, David, Dana, and like he was throwing a soccer ball into play from the sidelines, he launched the ham high into the air and it soared out over the meadow where I had once played with my brother, where David had taught me to throw a baseball, where my girlfriend had opened her ministry into life's deepest secrets. And that ham bounced, shedding pineapple rings, just like the wheels of a crashing car, loose over a cliff. The ham bounced and rolled and picked up speed and went ripping through the tall grass just like a wild animal. The momentum of the toss had brought us all to the railing, and we watched as it disappeared into the forest. The ham was gone. We turned back into the house. "Well," my father announced, "I suppose I ought to take Dana home." And to our delight on the ride home, he took us to McDonald's. And then to our shock and surprise, before he dropped her off, he bummed one of her long black cigarettes, which he seemed to enjoy immensely on the car ride home. I don't remember having ham after that. Of course, over the years, I've learned to be grateful for all food. But if I can help it this holiday season, you may see a turkey or a duck or a roast beef on our holiday table, but you won't ever see a ham. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Brandon. We've had a wonderful variety of stories so far. And our next teller is going to share with us an entirely different kind of tale, a personal story. She's had a wide and varied lifetime as a cancer survivor, as a spiritual guide, as a teacher, as a traveler, as an interpreter, as a court translator. There's just pretty much nothing that Genevieve Franklin hasn't done. And so we're very excited to be able to share with you what she's going to tell tonight. So please welcome Genevieve Franklin.
You never know when someone will say something to you that will profoundly change your life. When I was 25, I, who had been bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for most of my life, found myself at the brink of a catastrophic breakdown. I'd gone through one of those classic existential crises that are common to young adults, the details of which need no retelling. But I'd become involved in a, quote, spiritual organization. As often happens, the group came to be characterized by the leader's deception, manipulation, and gaslighting of its all too vulnerable members. I could never prove myself to be dedicated enough. I was an outcast. Desperate to find peace, I thought that I could grow deeper in my metaphysical quest by giving up family, friends, travel, television, films, radio, reading, bicycling, socializing, everything that was familiar to me, and moving, of all places, into what had been a kennel worker's cabin in a frigid coastside town. I'd been raised in the warm, glowing sun of a desert town, and up until then had been sharing a third-floor flat in San Francisco's tasteful Pacific Heights with 3 spirited roommates. It was a drastic mistake. I spiraled down, down, down with nothing and no one to stay my fall as I careened into a dark abyss. I should have read the signs when I first went to complete the lease for the cabin. Walking into a shadowy shop in a sinister part of the city that was a macabre throwback to the 19th century. I pushed through the heavy, splintered door and walked to the back of a long, windowless room. As I signed the documents, I shuddered as my elbow brushed the dry, bristly tail of a red fox curled on the stand to my right, well stuffed. A dusty crow on a jagged branch above me, equally well stuffed, peered over my left shoulder. And from the wall across from me, the antlers of a 12-point buck rose over the mangy hair of the senescent taxidermist who was to be my landlord, albeit in absentia. Behind me, standing a foot taller than my head, a once grand bear, reduced to a demeaning existence as a trophy, pawed at nothing, its mouth open in a useless bellow. But like that bear, I didn't see what was coming. So, cabin keys in hand, I drove into the pit of fog that was going to be my world for an interminable string of months that would first break and then make me. I can still see the place in my mind's eye, with its checkerboard kitchen floor of cracked black and white linoleum, and the tongue and groove knotty pine paneling of the den, turned orange by flaking shellac. I remember the broken tiles of the shower floor and the water rust that drip, 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 dripped and stained every porcelain basin, toilet, tub, and sinks. I can still feel the glazing compound crumbling off the frames of the windows, following the tracks of black that crept along every corner and crevice. And I can still hear the sound that the sole aging wall furnace made as the pilot light ignited it. But it was never warm enough, never could be there. I was freezing from fear, shivering in my solitude. and no manufactured heat would alleviate that. My life force was withering away like that of the taxidermist's stilled denizens. Coming home after work on black wintry nights, I'd pull up onto the gravel driveway. I could hear the rocks crunching under my slowly rolling tires, and I would come to a stop. I'd say to myself, get out, get out, pull yourself up, get out, turn the ignition off, turn it to the left, come on, grab your purse, open the door, put your foot out, come on, come on. But I was paralyzed. Many a night I spent in the car, even though the cottage door was only 3 feet away. It's peeling green paint, calling to me. All you need to do is step up on the porch, turn my rickety doorknob, come inside, come home. But I couldn't. The only thing that would get me up on those nights was the cold air, and how my eyes, though closed, could begin to sense the streaks of peach sunlight coming through the dawning sky. Then I'd rouse myself up, crawl out of the car, maybe make it to the bed, business clothes still on, kick off my pumps, pull the covers over my face, wait for the alarm, for the deliverance that another day of work and a commute there and back that was mercifully long. But the weekends, they were utterly intolerable. I could hear every tick of the clock, 1 second folding into the other. I would watch the minute hand creak, creak, creak to the next hour, dragging, dragging, dragging. Where had my life gone? My one distraction was going to the store for provisions. One day, I found myself at the local supermarket in the produce aisle. Standing before the mounds of bounty, I wistfully recalled the riot of sensations that the autumn harvest always brought, but that I no longer felt. Lustrous oranges with their cool, dimpled peels and alluring aromas, once considered exotic. The sensual smoothness of butternut squash. The striped and freckled sections of delicata squash. The Hubbard with its ornery, bumpy temperament, and the magnificently colored and perfectly shaped acorn squash. First comer in the Americas. No use. My senses lay languid. Discouraged, I stepped back. Then I noticed a woman approach me as she shopped. Her presence was animate, aware, affable. I turned to her, and for nothing else than to have someone to talk to, I said, "Excuse me, could you please tell me what time it is?" I knew what time it was all too well. She turned to me and said, 10 to 10, time to rejoice. Oh. I didn't know whether to be exasperated with her friendliness and platitudinal response, or to feel guilty that I didn't join in her elation. But I said, "Thank you very much," and left. I rather liked the alliteration, 10 to 10, time to rejoice. And every time it was 10 to 10, I would remember her. In fact, not only then, but more often than not, as I glanced at the clock, I'd remember that she had said, "Time to rejoice." And even though when I first heard her, my unspoken response had been, "Easy for you to say," those words filled my life with yearning. And I began to sense a ray of hope benevolently illuminating the shadows of my mind. And so, though the hours and the days still crept inexorably by, her words served as a constant beckoning, a kind of fail-safe talisman that my spirit could fervently clasp because of the kindness with which she had answered me. It took a long time, but ultimately, I was able to pull myself out of the deep chasm where I'd been lost for months and months and months. Gradually, I returned to the innocent understandings of my childhood, and I began to want to explore the promise of my young womanhood. I found that the path to serenity is a gentle, natural, inward course, not brought about by force. And I learned that the soul speaks its secrets through word of mouth. That is how I am present here today, fully alive and deeply grateful. Yo-Yo Ma said, "Good things happen when you meet strangers." And so it is. I often wonder what became of the woman whose words lifted me out of my desolation. I imagine she is still rejoicing, though she'll never know how profoundly she changed this stranger's life. And I, all these years later, I still have as my talisman, time to rejoice. The meaning I now share with you of what she said that turned out true. Rejoice in the thunder, rejoice in the rain, rejoice in the sun when it shines once again. Rejoice in forever and never again. Rejoice in good riddance and goodwill to men. Rejoice in the silence, rejoice in the sound, rejoice in the stillness when no one's around. Rejoice in the chaos, rejoice in the peace. Rejoice in the struggle and in the release. Rejoice in the moment, rejoice in the past. Rejoice even knowing that things will not last. Rejoice in the teardrops, they wash away pain. Rejoice in the promise that love will remain. Rejoice in the children for the hope that they bear of a life that's worth living and loving and fair. It's there for the taking. There is ever a choice to answer the call of the heart and rejoice.
Genevieve, we are so grateful. What a beautiful story. Thank you so much. It makes me feel rejoicing. And now we'll turn the time back over to David to see the tellers that are coming forth from the South for us.
And such tellers they are. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, everybody. Our next storyteller is, well, where I tend to be a little bit zany and humorous, my next storyteller tends to speak from the heart, from a place of nature, from a place of spirit. I bring you a storyteller from all the way across the screen here is Diana Spirit Hawk. She and I met at a meeting of the Southcoast Storytellers Guild. We've been married for 20 years now. She is an artist and a dream shaman, and she now shares with you the story of La Loba.
Well, with little help here. There was a forest. There was a forest right at the edge of a desert. And in that forest, in a little den dug out of the hollow of a tree, was a beautiful wolf. And she had 3 pups. And this day, she came out of her den and she sniffed the air. She smelled smoke. And where there was smoke, there was fire. And where there was fire, there was man. She began to see the orange flames. The smoke got denser. It was coming into her little den. She grabbed one of her pups. She could only take one at a time, and she carried it out towards the desert. And she came back and she got another pup, carried it out towards the desert. But the smoke was really heavy and dark and suffocating. And the last little pup that she was going to bring had already died. She went back to get the other pups to take them one at a time farther out into the desert. By the time she got back there, it was too late. The pups were gone. So there was nothing left for her but to begin crossing the desert to a new place. So she went off into the desert. And as she went, the sun rose higher and higher. It was hotter and hotter. She didn't know the desert. She didn't know where the water was. She was getting hot and dry. Finally, she found a saguaro and she laid down in the shade of it. She scratched at the saguaro and nibbled some of the flesh, trying to get the moisture out of it. When the sun went down, she went farther. She got up, she pulled herself up and went farther and farther until she couldn't go anymore. And she laid down in the shade of a bush. Sun began to rise again. And this was the second day. No water, no food. She looked for game as she went, but there were a few lizards here and there, but she just couldn't get them. And she moved on, slower and slower, on and on, and she came to another saguaro. And by this time, it was towards the end of the second day. And she mourned for the loss of her pups. She laid down in the tiny little shade of this saguaro and breathed her last breath. she was gone. Now, a little farther over, not far from that saguaro, was a cave of rich red earth. And there was a little pathway up to the cave. And in the cave, you could look on the walls. There were all manner of animals and some human beings drawn with the charcoal of a burnt stick, and some painted in. And this day, there came up the path an old shaman. He was the son of a son of a son of a shaman, many generations. And they were the spirit callers. They could bring things back to life. That's what he had learned from his father, who'd learned it from his father and his grandfather and great grandfather. And so there he was. He has picked these few days to spend time with the land and in the cave. So he built his little fire pit, got ready, laid his things down, went back down off the path, and just went out into the desert to see what he could find. And as he was walking in his moccasin feet, the heat of the sand coming through, he went to this certain saguaro. And there, as he was going over to it, he felt something under his foot, kind of sharp thing. And he bent down and picked it up. It was a little bone. And he moved the sand with his foot, and there were more bones. So he took out his cloth, and he gathered the bones up, and he put them in the cloth and wrapped them up and walked them back to the cave. And there he laid them out, and like a puzzle began to put them together, bone by bone. And as he was working and working, he realized, oh, this is too big to be a coyote. This is a wolf. And he just kept on working all the little bones, the leg bones and the ribs and the jawbone and the head. And he had almost the whole tail, but there at the end, he knew something was missing. So he went back down the path. He went to the saguaro and searched with his feet and his hands. Finally, he found it, one last little piece. It was the tail. So he went back and he put the tail onto the skeleton that was complete and laid out there on the other side of the fire. And it was getting dark. The sun was going down, the stars were coming out, and the moon was full and beautiful. And it was the time of the crack between the worlds, when the veil between the as above and the so below and the spirits was very thin. And that was the magic time. So he built his fire, put sage, cedar, and lavender over the fire, a healing smudge. And he brushed himself with the smudge. And he brushed the smoke over the wolf's bones. And he began to sing. And then he watched. And he would sing again. And he would shake his rattle over the bones. And he sang and he sang. And then he sat back. The moon rose. The stars came out. It was an exquisite night. And while he was sitting there, staring into the fire, a big wind flew into the cave and it blew onto the fire and sparks of smoke went everywhere. And like a whirlwind began to whirl around him and around the bones. And when finally the smoke and the wind died down, he saw that the body was beginning to take form. He could see the muscles coming in the sinews, and then fur began to form, skin. And as he watched before his very eyes, the entire body of the wolf became real again. And he sang some more. Yeah, 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 yeah. And he closed his eyes for a moment and he felt something on him. It was like hair. And she said, "Don't follow me, but thank you." He took a deep breath, a scary breath, and he opened his eyes. And there stood a woman clad only in her brown skin and hair, mane of hair that was gray and gold and yellow with splashes of black here and there. And she threw her head back. And she ran out of the cave, down the path, out into the desert. And he watched her as long as he could see her, as she ran through the desert. And then soon she was out of sight. And he went back to the village and he told them what had happened, that La Loba had come back from the dead. And she was out there somewhere in the desert. And word even got to the white camp on the other side. So now they tell, beware when you go out into the desert on a full moon. You may find La Loba waiting for you. And that's the story of La Loba, the wolf woman. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for telling. Oh, yes. I'll applaud you as much as I should.
My best fan.
To bring it on home tonight, we have my good friend, Ron Chick, who became a storyteller through being a teacher for his 35 years and learned that storytelling is the best way to get an idea through to somebody who may not want to hear much of anything that day. And retirement meant nothing to this man because he realized you can't retire. But storyteller, he pursues storytelling opportunities anywhere he can find them. And we're sure glad he does because he's built up quite a collection, including this one. This is Ron Chick, and the story he's telling us tonight is Cakes of Soap. Ron.
Well, can you hear me? I hope you can hear me. Unlike many of the folk tales and fairy tales I tell, this story is absolutely true. It was the Sunday just before the last week of school before Christmas break, and Isaac was miserable. He had learned just the week before that it was tradition in their town to give your teacher a gift, a nice gift, on the last day of school before Christmas hearkening back to the days when teachers were often paid in kind. He got home that afternoon and said to his mother, "I need some money. I want to get a gift for Miss Wilkins." She looked at him strangely and said, "Isaac, we have not the money to have a decent Sabbath. Why would we get a gift for your teacher with her car and her nice home?" "Please, Mama," he begged. She reached into her purse and pulled out a nickel. Even in 1934, that was not much money. Nonetheless, after shul, Sunday afternoon, when the shops would be open, Isaac set out. He went first to the nicest stores in town, but of course there was nothing in them at all for a nickel. And then he went into progressively lower end stores, including a so-called five and dime that still had nothing that he could give his teacher. Finally, to give up, he decided to head back toward his own part of town. But he didn't want to go the way he'd come. It had taken far too long. So he started cutting through back alleys, and he came across the kind of shop that, well, I guess it's a secondhand store or a junk store or just a back alley place with a variety of things that the shop owners hoped someone would pay for. Isaac stopped in front of the window and looked in, and there were great big blocks of unwrapped white soap with a sign that said, "2 for a penny." And a smile split his face. And he went inside and he picked up 10 blocks of soap and started to carry them toward the cash register. As he was standing there, who should come up but the worst possible child? Unfortunately, every school occasionally has a Jason. Tall, fast, strong, smart, and mean as a snake. He came up beside Isaac, who he had often teased, and said, "Well, Isaac, you finally gonna take a bath?" The sarcasm was lost on this immigrant. He just smiled and said, "Miss Wilkins, Christmas." Jason went outside. He said to his buddies, "You know what's gonna happen? That Jew boy's gonna give Miss Wilkins soap for Christmas. This is gonna be great." Don't anyone tell him. Don't anyone tell him. Wait for Friday. Monday morning, Isaac noticed that some children who were usually fairly nice looked at him sort of with a strange, pitying look, and others looked at him with even more contempt than he was used to. But he was excited about the week, and paid little attention to it. Friday morning finally came. Into the school streamed children, all of them carrying packages, mostly beautifully decorated. Isaac carried in an ordinary cardboard box tied with string, for he had no money for gift wrap, and proudly placed his box upon the table. The morning went on. The kids had their Christmas program and their party. Everything was cleaned up. Report cards were passed out. And now it was time for the teachers' gifts. Miss Wilkins was a wise woman. She knew there was something going on in her classroom, but she hadn't a clue what. She began opening gifts, and she found the things the teachers get. There was a whole ham from one family, and a few other very nice items, and a good many mugs and things of that nature the teachers get every year. Last, there was the one brown box. She thought about not opening it at all, or opening it in private, and then she saw Isaac's face as he smiled and beamed at her. So with a stern look around her classroom, she reached forward, untied the string, and lifted the lid. Her face broke into a radiant smile. She reached into the box and she pulled out a camel, a camel so exquisitely carved that it looked as if it was almost alive as she set it down at the tabletop. Out came two more camels, ox and ass, wise men, shepherds, an angel, Joseph, Mary. Finally, a little crater and a tiny Christ child. By now, many of the young ladies, were crying slightly, and many of the boys were staring at it in wonder. And then the teacher turned the box forward and set it over, for the inside of it had been carefully colored to make a manger. As the children filed past that day, Jason was heard to say, "Cakes of soap, huh?" Isaac didn't stay long in this his adopted country. After a full scholarship to Hudson University, where he graduated with honors and got his master's and his PhD, in 1958, he made Aliyah to Israel, there to teach in her universities, defend her against her enemies, and work in stone and brass. His artworks, his pieces, stand outside the Kisnet in Tel Aviv and in the Morton Simon Museum, not far away at all. But in a Midwest school, every year proudly displays at Christmas, is a beautifully carved nativity as a tribute to this lasting truth. It matters not if you are young or old, black, brown, or white. It matters not if you are Christian, Muslim, or Jew. You needn't be any of these things to celebrate the season of joy with me. All you've ever needed is love. The Cakes of Soap, an absolutely true story. And because we seem to have a couple of minutes, and I haven't shared this in a long while, obviously Marty didn't ever hear it. I am Ron Chick at Chain Unbroken Stories, and this is the story that tells you why. When the first storyteller told the first story, the children gathered, listened, imagined, felt, and remembered. And those children grew as children do. And one night, one of them told Storyteller's story their way and became Storyteller. And the people gathered, listened, imagined, felt,
Plug
and
back in
remembered.
here. There's a plug back here.
And those chain of stories goes back to the first words ever spoken, but will only go forward if we carry the chain. A Chain Unbroken Stories. I think that's it. Anybody? I'm not on, don't have any, I don't even know if you're waving. Hi, guys.
Oh, what a wonderful night we've had. We've been to Chile, we've been to Britain, we've been educated, not as much as maybe we don't speak hamster yet, but we have learned a lot of things. We have thought about human condors and kitchen floors and hams and this La Loba wandering somewhere, and we've heard profound thoughts. It's been a wonderful night, and we have so many people to thank for it. We are grateful to every teller and for the wide variety of ideas and blessings that they have given to us. And we're grateful to the people who have worked behind the scenes to make sure that this event took place. Grateful, of course, to Ed Lewis and to all the SAC people for making this idea come into play. We're grateful to Marty for her technological teacherly know-how getting it all rolling. And we're grateful to Meg Brown and Katie Mangan for all the work that they did preparing and planning and organizing so that everybody would know it. And in particular, we thank each and every teller for the effort that they made to make this wonderful night come true for us. And as far as I know, That's all that needs to be said. I think we're done and ready to meditate on those things and go forth and rejoice. So thank you very much
Place to rejoice.
and good night.
Mhm.
Should I stop the recording?
Yes.